The party was in full swing, a loud and chaotic celebration that felt like it was physically pressing in on me from all sides. Laughter echoed off the walls, and my father's booming voice cut through it all, telling some grand story. It was all for him, of course. My brother Brandon, the family's golden boy who wore his charisma like a shield, was holding court in the very center of the living room. My parents orbited him like planets, beaming with a pride so bright it was almost blinding. They graciously accepted compliments on the wonderful food and decorations, an entire celebration that I had spent the last 2 weeks planning and quietly paying for. I could feel the ghost of the $2,500 catering receipt in my pocket. Just another invisible contribution to the shrine of Brandon. That's when my father, David, a man who only valued achievements he could brag about at the bar, caught my eye. He slung a heavy arm around Brandon's shoulders, pulling him over to an old friend. "Jim, you know my boy Brandon," he roared. Then his eyes flicked to me and his tone shifted, becoming laced with a familiar, dismissive amusement. "And this," he said with a little chuckle, gesturing vaguely with his beer. "This is my other son. He's the paper soldier of the family. Works a desk job for the Navy, you know, pushing pencils somewhere safe while his brother does the real work." I watched Brandon's face as the words landed. He heard every single one. For a split second, our eyes met, and then a slow, self-satisfied smirk spread across his lips. He didn't defend me. He didn't correct the record. He just let the lie hang in the air, enjoying the warmth of the spotlight even more now that it cast a shadow over me. My hand tightened around my glass, and I could feel my knuckles press against the cool surface. Externally, I held a tight, polite smile, a mask I had perfected over a lifetime. But internally, something didn't just break. It turned to ice. A final thread of hope I didn't even know I was still holding on to had just snapped clean in two. And the worst part, that hollow feeling in my chest wasn't shock, it was recognition. It was just the loudest and final echo of a story I had been forced to live my whole life. That nickname, the Paper Soldier, wasn't a spontaneous insult cooked up over party chatter. It was a title. It was the role I had been assigned in the long-running family play, a production that had been going on for as long as I could remember. In this play, every character had their part, and there was never any doubt who the star was. My brother Brandon, the family's charismatic but reckless golden child, was born for the spotlight. He was the hero of every story, the protagonist of every memory, and the recipient of every single ounce of grace my parents had to give. My part was simply to be the reliable, boring stagehand, the one who made sure his lighting was always perfect, even if I had to stand in the dark to do it. I remember the day the gap between us became a canyon. It was the summer after his enlistment. He was 19, and to hear my family tell it, he was a hero, sacrificing his youth for his country. The truth was a bit less noble. He was dodging minor legal trouble and had run out of other options. But facts rarely mattered in the face of a good story. To celebrate his grand decision, my parents bought him a brand new truck. I can still picture it perfectly. A gleaming black monster of a vehicle parked in the driveway with a giant red bow on the hood. My father David, the man who only saw value in things he could show off, was practically vibrating with pride. He paraded his friends outside, slapping the hood and boasting about the horsepower, about his son, the brave boy. The whole family gathered on the lawn, raising glasses of champagne to toast Brandon, who just leaned against the grill with that easy practice smirk of his, like he'd earned it. I stood at the edge of the group, just watching. I didn't just see a truck. I saw the physical manifestation of a family rule. Brandon's wants were necessities and my needs were inconveniences. About 6 months later, that rule was carved into stone. I was stationed at my first naval base trying to get on my feet. I'd found a tiny run-down apartment I could almost afford, but I was just a few hundred short on the security deposit. After weeks of agonizing, I finally called home. I spoke to my mother, Carol, a woman who mistook her son's constant dependence for a sign of his loving nature and my independence as a sign of coldness. I laid out my case logically and calmly, explaining that it was a loan I could pay back in 3 months. There was a long pause on the line before she sighed, her voice thick with pity, not for me, but for herself for having to deliver the bad news. "Oh, honey," she said, her voice dripping with that signature gentle disappointment. "You know money is tight, and besides, you're the responsible one. You'll figure it out. You always do." The next sentence was the one that really drove it home. "We have to keep our emergency fund available for Brandon. He's not as good with money as you are. You know how he is." I remember staring at the peeling paint on my barracks wall, the internal ledger in my mind, furiously clicking through all the times Brandon had been bailed out of trouble. The wrecked cars, the gambling debts, the lost rent money. His irresponsibility was a protected class. My responsibility was a punishment. I thanked her, hung up the phone, and took on a second job on weekends. This was the core of the family's false narrative. Brandon, the army infantryman, who I later found out spent most of his time as a supply clerk, was the real soldier. He was on the front lines, facing the danger, a hero in boots. My path in the Navy was quieter. It was more focused, more discreet. The problem is my actual career path, the one I had been working towards with a singular, all-consuming focus, was naval special warfare. And that world is built on a foundation of absolute secrecy. You don't talk about training. You don't talk about missions. You don't talk about anything. My silence wasn't a choice, it was a requirement. But my family, in their infinite wisdom, took the vacuum of information I gave them and filled it with their own fiction. My inability to share details wasn't due to the confidential nature of my work. It was because I was supposedly ashamed. They decided I must have taken the easiest possible route, a safe office job, far from any action. They created a comfortable story that fit their precast roles. Brandon was the warrior, and I became the joke they told to make his story sound even better. I became the paper soldier. Lying in bed that night, the paper soldier insult ringing in my ears, I realized they would never choose to see the real me. So I decided I would no longer give them a choice. As I walked away from the party and back to the quiet of my old bedroom, the years of simmering resentment and quiet hurt finally cooled. They didn't disappear. They transformed. The emotional storm inside me gave way to a strange and profound stillness, a zone of cold, hard clarity. I finally accepted a truth I'd been fighting my whole life. I could not make them love me or respect me or even see me. Seeking their approval was a game I was destined to lose because they wrote the rules and changed them whenever they wanted. So, I decided to stop playing. The goal was no longer to win their affection. The goal was simply to present the truth, undeniable and absolute. I already knew the perfect opportunity was coming. My mother had been talking about it for weeks. Brandon's commanding officer, a respected Army major named Thompson, was scheduled to stop by later in the evening to pay his respects. In my family's world, this major was a figure of authority, a man whose opinion held weight. He was an objective third party, an unimpeachable source from the world they claimed to admire so much. He wasn't part of their narrative. He didn't know the script. And in that moment, I realized he was the key. He would be the catalyst. My plan didn't require yelling or arguments or a dramatic presentation of evidence. It was far simpler and far more devastating. I walked over to the garment bag hanging in the back of the closet, the one I never used when I came home. I unzipped it, and the deep dark blue of the fabric seemed to absorb the light in the room. I laid my Navy service dress blue uniform out on the bed with a precision that felt almost surgical. Every crease was sharp, every surface immaculate. This wasn't just clothing. This was my sworn testimony. I began the quiet ritual of preparing it, my hands steady and sure. I affixed the ribbons to the bar above the pocket, each one a silent testament to a time and place they knew nothing about. Each colorful stripe was a chapter in my real story, the one I had lived while they were busy telling their preferred version. This uniform was my collection of receipts, and there were two that mattered more than all the others. First, I picked up the polished gold oak leaf insignia and pinned it to my collar. The rank of commander, a position of leadership and responsibility earned over nearly 2 decades of service. Then, with a final deliberate motion, I took out the most important receipt of all. It was heavy for its size, a small piece of gold that carried the weight of a lifetime. The special warfare insignia, the seal trident, an eagle, a flintlock pistol, an anchor, and a trident. An emblem earned through a hell I could never describe for a brotherhood I could never share with them. It was the one symbol that irrefutably burned their paper soldier narrative to the ground. I had the proof. I had the plan. I wasn't going to start a fight. I was just going to walk back into that party and let the truth speak for itself. It was time to show them what a paper soldier really looked like. I stood in the hallway for what felt like an eternity, listening to the familiar rhythm of the party. I was waiting, not with anxiety, but with the patient focus of a hunter. Then I heard it, a new voice, deeper and more measured than the others, and I knew Major Thompson had arrived. This was it. There was no grand strategy left to plan, no more evidence to gather. There was only the act itself. I took one slow, deep breath, the air filling my lungs and steadying the last of any lingering tremors. The pain and resentment were gone, replaced by a quiet, unbreakable resolve. I felt like I was standing outside of myself, watching a character I was about to play. My heart was calm. My hands were steady. I was ready. Stepping from the dim hallway into the brightly lit living room was like stepping onto a stage. The effect was immediate. A wave of silence rippled out from me, smothering the laughter and chatter as heads began to turn. Conversations faltered mid-sentence. People's smiles froze on their faces. The first to react, of course, was my family. My mother, Carol, stared at me, her face a mask of horrified confusion. She scurried over, grabbing my arm and hissing through a clenched teeth smile. "What do you think you are doing? Go back to your room and change right now. You are making a scene." My father's face was a thundercloud of angry bewilderment. But it was Brandon who gave me the final gift of his arrogance. He let out a loud, braying laugh. "Dude, what is this, Halloween?" He scoffed loud enough for everyone to hear, trying to play dress up to feel important. His words hung in the air, but they no longer had any power over me. They were just noise, because across the room, my real audience had finally seen me. I saw Major Thompson, Brandon's commanding officer, and a man whose entire bearing radiated quiet authority, stop his conversation mid-word. His casual party demeanor vanished in an instant. His back straightened, his shoulders squared, and his eyes, trained to assess and understand, widened almost imperceptibly as they scanned the uniform. He took in the ribbons. He took in the rank on my collar, and then his gaze locked onto the gold pin on my chest. The easygoing guest was gone, replaced entirely by a professional soldier. He gave a curt nod to the person he was speaking with and began walking toward me, his path straight and deliberate. He didn't look at my mother, who was still sputtering at my side. He didn't look at my father, and he certainly didn't look at Brandon. He walked right past them like they were furniture, his eyes fixed only on me. The silence in the room was now absolute. It was thick and heavy, and you could feel the weight of everyone holding their breath. The major came to a halt, a respectful distance in front of me, and stood at ease, a position of difference. "Excuse me, sir," he said, his voice calm and clear, cutting through the tension. "I'm Major Thompson." He gave a short, professional nod. Then his eyes flicked from my face down to the sealed trident and back up again. He paused, and in that pause, my entire family's narrative was put on trial. Then came the question that would serve as the verdict. Is that the SEAL commander? The title spoken with such genuine, unforced respect echoed in the dead quiet of the room. I saw my father's jaw go slack, his angry confusion curdling into utter disbelief. My mother's hand flew to her mouth, her eyes wide with a dawning horror. And Brandon, the color drained from his face so fast he looked like a ghost. The smug smirk was gone, replaced by the wide-eyed, slack-jawed panic of a man watching his world vaporize before his eyes. The major, sensing the impossibly bizarre tension, added, "It's an honor to meet you, Commander." Your reputation in the SOCOM community is significant. I let the words hang in the air for a moment longer, a final damning indictment of their fiction. I looked at my father, then my mother, then my brother, holding each of their gazes for a brief silent moment. I didn't need to say a word to them. Their faces said it all. Then I turned my back on them completely and gave my full attention to the Major. "It's a pleasure to meet you, Major," I said, my voice even and steady. "Your man here, Brandon. He's lucky to have you as his company." And in the ringing silence that followed, I didn't feel rage or even triumph. I just felt light. For the first time in my life, I was the one who got to turn around and walk away. I didn't wait for a response. I just turned and walked out the front door, leaving the wreckage of their perfect narrative scattered on the living room floor behind me. The cool night air felt like the first clean breath I had taken in 20 years. It was quiet out on the street, a stark contrast to the suffocating silence I had left inside. I was halfway to my car when my phone buzzed in my pocket. I pulled it out and saw a message from my mother. The words glowed with rage on the dark screen. "How could you embarrass us like that in front of everyone?" Before I could even process it, another one came through from my father. "You have no idea the damage you've done." I just stood there under a street light watching them roll in. Then after a few minutes of silence, the tone began to shift. The rage gave way to a desperate, panicked form of damage control. "We never knew." My mother texted. "Why didn't you ever tell us? We would have been so proud." The messages kept coming, a frantic barrage of excuses, justifications, and self-serving apologies. I read each one and I waited to feel something. Anger, pity, maybe even a shred of the old hurt. But I felt nothing. It was like reading a story about people I used to know a long, long time ago. The words had no weight, no power. They were just text on a screen. I scrolled to my father's contact, pressed the screen, and chose the option to block his number. Then I did the same for my mother and for Brandon. With 3 simple taps, a lifetime of noise finally went silent. A year later, the silence is no longer an absence of something, but a presence. It's the sound of my own life, on my own terms. I live in a small house 1,000 miles away from that party. In my garage, there's a workshop filled with a smell of sawdust and wood varnish. My hands, which were once trained for demolition, are now relearning the art of creation. I spend my weekends restoring old, discarded furniture, pieces that other people saw as broken or useless. I sand away the old peeling paint, revealing the beautiful, strong grain underneath. I fix the wobbly legs, mend the broken joints, and give it a new life. There's a quiet satisfaction in it, a peace that I never found in any mission or combination. It's a slow, methodical process of healing something that was once written off as a lost cause. Sometimes in the early morning, I take my coffee out to the small dock behind my house and watch the sun rise over the water, and I don't think about anything at all. For the longest time, I thought strength was about enduring the pain. I thought it was about quietly carrying the weight of my family's dismissal, about succeeding in the shadows despite their ignorance. I thought the medals on my chest and the rank on my collar were the ultimate proof of my strength. But standing in that living room, I realized the truth. My uniform wasn't the weapon that won the war. It was just the tool that allowed me to negotiate the terms of my surrender from it. My real strength wasn't in the trident I had earned. It was in the decision I finally made to turn my back on the people who refused to see me. It was the courage to block their numbers. The courage to move away. The courage to build a new life from scratch. One that didn't require their approval as a building material. It was the realization that I didn't need to prove my worth to them. I only needed to accept it for myself. I heard from a cousin a few months ago. She said the fallout from that night was legendary. Apparently, Brandon was humbled for about a week before he started spinning the story, recasting himself as the supportive brother who was in on my secret career the whole time. And my parents. They now tell anyone who will listen how immensely proud they are of their son, the Navy SEAL commander. They've sent messages through relatives asking when I'll come home, saying they miss me. But their validation is a currency I no longer accept. It's counterfeit. It was never about me. It was always about how my story made them look. Their pride is just a new mask, and I have no interest in seeing the same old faces underneath. Their chapter is closed. The ledger is balanced, and the book is now on a shelf collecting dust. I learned that you can't force people to see your worth. You can only decide that you are no longer available to be devalued. The title paper soldier was meant to be an insult, but in the end, I was the one who folded up that old life and sailed away on my own. If you've ever had to become your own hero because no one else would step up, drop a I see you in the comments below. Your story matters.